who shows up to their university prom in a trash bag and ends up dancing with the man who secretly paid for her ticket, not knowing he owns the entire building. Scarlet had nothing left to prove and nothing left to wear. Her final year dress was ruined. Her pride? Hanging by a thread. But her little sister wrapped a trash bag around her and whispered, "Just go." So she did, and walked into a hall full of glitter and judgment only to be humiliated in front of everyone. What no one expected was that the man in the shadows, silent, powerful, untouchable, would stand, cross the room, and ask her to dance. Because he'd been watching her all along. And what began as a cruel joke became the beginning of everything. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The invitation had already started to fade when Scarlet found it tucked inside a plain white envelope slipped between unpaid bills and a note from student housing about overdue laundry. Inside was a ticket, one golden, embossed rectangle that read, University Graduation Gala Grand Ballroom. Black tie. No entry without ticket. She stared at it for nearly a full minute before noticing the note inside. Just one sentence written in slanted pen. You belong there, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. No name. No return address. Scarlet blinked. She hadn't registered for the prom. Couldn't afford it. Between her shifts at the on-campus cafe and the late-night janitor job, there wasn't even enough left to buy a second-hand dress, let alone a ticket that cost more than her weekly groceries. So who? She tucked the note back inside, carefully. It was probably a mistake, meant for someone else. One of those scholarships handed out to the overachieving interns in the business department. Not for her, the quiet girl who took extra classes just to avoid going home. And yet, when she scanned the QR code on the back, it blinked green. Valid. That night, she didn't sleep. The next morning, Scarlet walked to work under a drizzle of cold rain, her coat clutched close and her shoes soaked through. She passed the designer boutiques near campus, where glittering dresses smiled at her from mannequins like lies with zippers. Her own dress would be different. Not expensive. Not impressive. But honest. Her mother had found the fabric in a donation bin behind an old community theater, pale lilac with frayed edges and a tiny coffee stain near the hem. But Scarlet loved it. It reminded her of resilience. Of something meant to be thrown away, finding purpose again. Her mother stayed up 3 nights sewing it by hand. Scarlet watched her by candlelight, patching tiny holes with thread that didn't quite match. When she finished, she turned the dress to her and said, "You don't need to shine like them. You just need to walk in like you're already lit." Scarlet hugged her hard. She planned to take the dress to a nearby alterations shop just to add a clasp. A quick fix. Nothing more. She should have trusted her gut when the seamstress, a bored woman with polished nails and too much perfume, eyed the fabric and said, "Is this a costume?" It wasn't until the day before the prom that Scarlet returned to pick it up and found the dress soaked in red dye. The lilac was gone. In its place, a streaked, bleeding mess of color. Unwearable. The seamstress barely apologized. Claimed an accidental spill. But Scarlet knew better. It wasn't just the fabric. It was the look on her face. Smug. Dismissive. Familiar. That evening, while sitting on the edge of her bunk in the tiny dorm room she shared with her sister, Scarlet tried not to cry. But the tears came anyway. "What if you didn't need a dress?" her sister asked softly. Scarlet blinked. The girl, only 16, wiry and clever, knelt beside her and pulled out a roll of black plastic. "What if we made a statement?" Scarlet stared. A statement. Her sister's eyes glinted. If they're gonna laugh, give them something to remember. What followed was equal parts chaos and creativity. The trash bag became the base. A curtain of sheer tulle borrowed from a window became the overlay. Twine from an old project turned into a belt. Her sister tied her hair in a slick braid, added silver earrings from the flea market, and brushed glitter onto her shoulders like armor. Scarlet stood before the mirror and saw a warrior. Not a princess. Not a victim. A force. And maybe that would be enough. The ballroom loomed like a cathedral, chandeliers like frozen stars, people in gowns that shimmered like oceans. Everywhere she turned, heels clicked, champagne glasses clinked, and someone was laughing too loudly. Scarlet stepped inside. Silence followed. Not because she was late, but because of what she wore. Eyes turned. Smirks rose. Whispers began. And still, she kept walking. One step, then another. Shoulders back. Chin high. She didn't see the man in the shadows, the one leaning against the marble pillar near the entrance, watching her like she was the only real thing in the room. But he saw her. And when the first cruel voice rang out across the crowd, "Look, she's recycling now." He straightened slowly. His name was Alexander Lorenz. And tonight, he wouldn't stay in the shadows for long. She should have turned back the moment they laughed. But she didn't. Scarlet walked farther into the ballroom, each step echoing louder than the one before. The polished floor reflected her makeshift dress like a dare. She heard it again, a giggle, sharper this time, from somewhere to the right. Trash chic is a new genre, apparently. She's brave, I'll give her that. Someone pretended to cough, landfill couture. She clenched her hands. Not to fight, just to stop them from shaking. At the far end of the hall, the music swelled. A couple twirled in perfect sync, her dress glittering like rain under the lights. A photographer panned slowly, completely ignoring the girl who had just entered the room wearing garbage. Scarlet wasn't surprised. She was used to being invisible, or worse, noticed only to be mocked. At university, people were more subtle than they were in high school, but cruelty learned to dress itself better here. Sometimes it wore heels, sometimes designer tuxedos, and sometimes it wore a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Like Sam Varick's. He spotted her near the refreshment table, double-took, and then laughed aloud. Sam, president of the student council, best friend of the dean's daughter, and favorite of every professor with tenure. Scarlet, he called out as if confirming a rumor. Did the cleaning crew sneak in? A ripple of laughter followed. She turned away, said nothing, took a glass of water with shaking hands and moved to the edge of the room, behind a velvet column where the shadows were deeper. She almost didn't notice the man already standing there. But he noticed her. Alexander Lorenz had been at dozens of these galas. Sat through speeches, shook hands with board donors, wrote checks that covered scholarships no one thanked him for. But this year he came only to watch quietly. He didn't need the attention. He owned the building after all. Literally. The ballroom, the entire top floor of the East Wing, the very marble under their feet, all his. But none of that felt real anymore. Not like her. He'd seen her once before, months ago, carrying a tray of half-empty coffee cups through the snow while shielding a younger girl from the wind with her coat. No umbrella. No complaints. Just instinctive protection. And then again, working late in the design lab, alone, pinning cloth scraps onto a mannequin made of bent wire. And now here she was, in a trash bag, and holding herself with more grace than anyone else in the room. Scarlet didn't know how long she stood there in the shadow. Maybe minutes, maybe less. But she felt the shift before she saw it, the parting of the crowd, the sudden quiet, the chill of silence that spreads when someone important moves. He stepped forward, not with drama, not with flair, just certainty. Alexander crossed the ballroom, cutting clean through the murmurs, the whispers, the pretense. His suit was understated, matte black with no tie, collar slightly open. He looked like a man who could afford anything and wanted nothing fake. He stopped in front of her. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, gently, he said, "I was hoping you'd come." Scarlet blinked. "What?" He extended a hand. "May I?" The room froze. Sam choked on his champagne. Scarlet's voice barely left her. I'm Alexander." She didn't take the hand. Not yet. Why? He leaned in slightly, not close enough to touch, just close enough that only she would hear. "Because you walked in when everyone expected you to run. Because you wore truth, not fabric. Because when they laughed, you stood still." Her chest rose once, then fell. Slowly, uncertainly, she placed her hand in his. and he led her onto the dance floor. The music didn't change, but the air did. People parted, unsure of the protocol for what they were seeing. The girl in the trash bag and the man in the matte black suit, spinning slowly under the lights as if no one else existed. Scarlet had never danced in public. She wasn't sure she was even doing it right. But his hand at her back was steady, his steps intuitive. And her feet somehow remembered. He didn't speak again until halfway through the song. "I bought this building 6 years ago," he said quietly. "Back when they were about to shut down the arts department." She looked up, startled. "You, I paid for the theater, the rooftop garden, the design lab you sit in late at night." He smiled. "And yes, your ticket." Scarlet swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for charity. I didn't offer it," he replied. "I offered acknowledgement." She shook her head. "Why me?" Alexander's gaze held hers. "Because when I was your age, I wore a suit I found in a lost and found bin, and no one asked me why." A pause. "You're the first person I've seen since who made me remember how that felt." When the music ended, no one clapped. No one knew how. But something had shifted. The laughter had dried up. The judgment turned to confusion and then to quiet. Scarlet stepped back. She didn't curtsy. Didn't smile. She just nodded once. And walked away. Alexander didn't follow. Not yet. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the moment the real story began. Scarlet didn't return to the dance floor. She found a quiet hallway just outside the ballroom, cold marble, too bright lighting, and a view of the city that looked like it belonged to someone else's life. She pressed her palms against the window pane. The silence out here was better than the staring inside. No more whispers. No more phones pointed at her like weapons disguised as curiosity. Just glass and breath and cold clarity. She thought of her sister. Of her mother's hands sewing buttons into that lilac dress. Of the years she had spent folding her hopes into corners small enough to hide but too sharp to throw away. And she thought of him. The man in the suit who knew her name before she'd spoken it. Who took her hand without flinching. Who didn't laugh. Behind her, the door creaked open. She didn't turn. "Most people don't walk out after a moment like that," a voice said. Smooth. Grounded. Familiar. Scarlet's reflection caught his dark suit, silver cufflink, quiet posture. Still watching her, even here. "I'm not most people," she murmured. "No," he said softly. "You're not." A pause. Then he stepped beside her. They stood in silence for a moment, both watching the skyline as if the city might spell out the answers neither of them were ready to say. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I did," he answered. "Not for them. For you. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to." Scarlet crossed her arms. "Do you always rescue women in trash bags?" He smiled, not a smirk, but something quiet and honest. "Only the ones who wear them like armor." That made her pause. Because it wasn't flattery. It wasn't a line. It was the kind of sentence that didn't come from a man trying to impress, but from someone who had spent a long time understanding the difference between costume and courage. He leaned slightly against the window ledge, folding his arms. "You didn't flinch," he said. "When they laughed." She didn't reply. "I've sat in rooms full of CEOs, billionaires, kings." He paused, "but I've never seen anyone command silence like you did tonight." She let out a breath. It didn't feel like command. It felt like surviving. "Sometimes," he said, "those are the same thing." Scarlet turned to face him. "Why are you still talking to me?" His gaze met hers without hesitation. "Because you're not asking me for anything." She blinked. That wasn't what she expected. He continued, voice lower now. "Most people want a seat at the table. But you made your own place in the room. Wearing plastic and defiance." Scarlet's throat tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. He straightened slowly, as if reading something in her stillness. "I'm not trying to make this a fairy tale," he added. "There's no limo waiting. No glass slipper." "Good," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "I don't wear heels." That made him laugh, the kind of quiet laugh that comes from deep down when you haven't done it in a while. I'm just saying, he went on, if you ever want to talk, not about tonight, but about what's next. He pulled a small white envelope from his inner jacket pocket and offered it to her. Scarlet took it with hesitant fingers. Inside, there was no money, no check, no card, just a folded swatch of soft, heavy silk, deep midnight blue, and a note. Designed something new. Not for them. For you. She looked up. This is the material left over from my mother's last project before she passed, he said. She taught me how to build something out of scraps. I think she would have liked you. Scarlet said nothing for a long moment. Then she closed the envelope carefully, held it to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you." Alexander nodded once, then glanced at his watch. "I should go." She tilted her head. "Back to your corner?" He smiled again. "Back to the world that talks too loud and listens too little." And with that he turned. But just before disappearing down the corridor, he looked back. "You weren't the best dressed tonight," he said. "But you were the most unforgettable." Then he was gone. And for the first time all night. Scarlet smiled. That evening she walked back to the dorm alone. Not in shame. Not in triumph. But in something quieter, steadier. Like roots finding the ground after a storm. She placed the silk swatch on her desk beside her sketchbook. Her sister had already fallen asleep, tangled in a blanket with one sock missing. The soft sound of her breathing grounded Scarlet more than applause ever could. She turned on the lamp, opened her notebook, and wrote 2 words at the top of a blank page. Start again. Scarlet didn't tell anyone what happened after the prom. Not about the dance. Not about the hallway. And certainly not about the man in the shadows with eyes like memory and hands that didn't shake when he reached for hers. Instead, she worked. Harder than before. She stitched late into the night, designing a collection for a small campus exhibition, 5 looks made entirely from repurposed material. Newspaper folds, denim patches, curtain tassels, and one unfinished piece, midnight blue silk, stitched by hand, every line whispering of a second chance. She called it Reclaimed. The exhibition took place in the university's side gallery, a clean white room with flickering spotlights and barely enough heating. People came for the free pastries and stayed for the shock. Because no one expected this girl, the one who once mopped the hallway floor, to bring something so bold, so layered, so fearless. A few professors clapped longer than others. 2 gallery reps asked for her contact. And one quiet woman in a silver scarf left a card with only a phone number and the words, "Let's talk internships." Scarlet didn't cry. But when she got back to her dorm, she placed the card next to the blue fabric envelope and exhaled like someone finally believing they deserved to breathe. Days passed. Then weeks. And though she tried not to admit it, she noticed the absence of a certain name. There were no texts. No follow-ups. No mysterious envelopes. No second dance. Just silence. She told herself it was expected. That the man in the suit had done his part and she had done hers. That it had been a moment, intense, real, but fleeting. And that was okay. Mostly. Until one afternoon when she went to check her university mailbox and found a folded sketch tucked behind the stack of unpaid bills. No note. No signature. Just a pencil drawing on soft cream paper. It was her. Standing beneath a string of fairy lights, 1 foot pointed out in mid-step, the trash bag dress drawn in delicate folds as if it were made of silk. Below it, 2 words. The original. Scarlet stood in the hallway for a long time, holding the paper like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. She didn't see him again until a week later. She was walking through campus, arms full of fabric, when she saw him seated alone on a bench near the sculpture garden. No bodyguards. No phone in hand. Just stillness. For a second she froze. Then she kept walking. But just as she passed him, he spoke softly without looking up. "I never meant to disappear." She stopped. Turned. He met her eyes. "I thought giving you space was the respectful thing." Scarlet tilted her head. "And what changed?" "You didn't leave my head," he said simply. And I don't want to be the kind of man who watches from windows anymore. Her arms lowered slightly. I still don't want charity, she whispered. I'm not offering charity, he said. I'm offering conversation. A pause. Over coffee? Scarlet studied him. He looked tired. Human. Slightly rumpled in the best way, like he'd stopped trying to be the man everyone expected and started trying to be someone real. She nodded. Okay. But I'm picking the cafe. Deal, he said. As long as they serve tea. They met 3 times after that. Always in public. Always brief. But each time longer than the last. They talked about fabrics, about failure, about how most of life feels like threading a needle in the dark. She learned he liked black tea with cinnamon. He learned she liked drawing on napkins. She told him about her first sewing machine, one she found broken in a donation pile and fixed with hairpins and tape. He told her about the first deal he ever closed and how he threw up from nerves in the janitor's closet afterward. By the 4th meeting, he didn't call her Mississippi. By the 5th, she called him Alex. Something was growing between them, not fast, not fiery. Something better. Trust. Then came the night that changed everything. She was walking home after finishing a late project when she noticed the light in the studio was still on. She stepped inside and froze. There, on the mannequin, was a finished gown. Her blue silk. But not the way she'd imagined it. This version was cleaner. Sharper. The stitching hand-done but confident. The back laced like armor. The bodice layered in a way that made her breath catch. And pinned to the front was a note. For you to wear as you are. Not how they expect. She didn't have to guess who made it. And she didn't need to try it on to know it fit. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope folded with precision. Inside was a letter from the New Voices in Design Council, a nonprofit foundation hosting a showcase for rising designers whose work spoke of sustainability, identity, and rebellion. The kind of show people whispered about in boardrooms and watched for recruitment. Scarlet had been nominated. By someone anonymous. She stared at the letter for 10 full minutes, barely breathing. Then read it again. And again. Until her little sister peeked into the room and whispered, "You're doing it, aren't you?" Scarlet didn't nod. She just whispered back, "I think so." The showcase was set for a Friday evening, held at the most unexpected venue of all, the restored upper atrium of Vellum Hall, the university's architectural crown jewel. The building had been closed for years. The renovation, funded quietly and fully by one man, had reopened it just last semester. A man who, despite now being part of Scarlet's real life, had not texted her all week. No calls. No napkin sketches. No swatches. No tea. Just silence. Again. But this time it didn't undo her. Because now she had a gown. The evening of the show, Scarlet stood in the tiny makeshift dressing area, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The blue silk gown fit her like memory. Not perfect, but intimate. Honest. Bold in its simplicity and powerful in its defiance. The neckline dipped just enough to say she wasn't hiding anymore. The back exposed a thin line of scars from years of overwork, and she left them uncovered on purpose. Her sister helped pin her braid with silver thread. The student volunteer handed her the mic. "You're on in 4. Scarlet stepped onto the stage like she was stepping into light for the first time. But this time she wasn't walking into a trap. She was claiming space. The audience was full of strangers. Designers. Faculty. Mentors. Media. And one seat near the back, empty. She began anyway. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said clearly. "Mostly because for a long time I thought being visible meant being vulnerable, and where I come from, that's not always safe." Her voice was low but grounded. She didn't smile too much. Didn't apologize once. "My designs are made from things other people threw away, literally. Fabric scraps, broken zippers, things found in donation bins. But also from moments people discard. Fear. Shame. Silence." She turned slightly, gesturing to the mannequin behind her. "This is the final piece of my collection. It's called the original. Not because it's flawless, but because it reminds me that value doesn't come from where you buy something. It comes from what you survive in it. She paused, and in that pause, the room changed. The kind of hush that comes not from boredom or politeness, but from recognition. Then, suddenly, movement. Someone stepped into the empty seat in the back row. She didn't look directly, but she felt it. Alexander. He was here. After the presentation, applause rose, not thunderous, but steady, sincere. People came up to shake her hand. A woman from a textile company asked if she'd be open to consulting. A local publication took photos, but she barely felt any of it, because when the crowd parted for a moment, she saw him. No suit, just a soft charcoal sweater worn at the cuffs. No entourage, no spotlight, only eyes that said I saw every second. He stepped forward slowly and didn't say anything, not until she reached him. Then quietly, I didn't help you rise. Scarlet blinked. I never said you did. He nodded once. I just watched the girl in a trash bag walk into a ballroom like she owned it. And I knew whatever came next, I wanted to earn a place beside her. Her heart stopped for half a breath, then kicked hard. You already have, she whispered. And for the first time, she reached for his hand. No one took pictures. No one clapped. No one saw. But in that quiet moment, they both knew this was the beginning of something they'd build not for show, but for truth. They didn't rush anything after that night. There were no grand declarations, no headlines, no press releases, just quiet things. Shared tea, unfinished sketches left on cafe napkins, text messages that said, still working, followed by, me too. Alexander didn't try to sweep her away into his world. Scarlet didn't try to impress her way into his. Instead, they built something between them gently, like folding a new piece of fabric, careful not to crease what already existed. One afternoon, he showed up at the community center where she volunteered to teach kids how to hand-stitch. He didn't say a word, just sat in the back and smiled when one boy tried to turn a pillowcase into a superhero cape. Later, when they walked home together, Scarlet nudged him softly and said, "You'd be a terrible teacher." He grinned. I know. I was just watching the real one. On the last day of spring semester, a small article ran in the university bulletin. Student designer transforms trash into triumph, Scarlet Lane's journey from mockery to momentum. The photo showed her standing next to her mannequin, arms crossed, eyes sharp, smile small but proud. Alexander kept the article, folded neatly, tucked inside a drawer with the ticket stub from the night she walked in wearing that infamous dress. That summer, she launched a microbrand. 3 designs, all limited run, all made with upcycled materials. Each one named after a moment she had once wanted to forget. Dye spill, cough in the ballroom, twine. They sold out in 48 hours. A few weeks later, she received a package. Inside, a framed print. Her original gown, sketched by hand in Alexander's unmistakable pencil style. But behind her silhouette, he'd drawn a second figure. Not him. A little girl, reaching up to touch the folds of her gown, like seeing herself reflected for the first time. And below it, one line written in pen. If she sees you, she'll know she can become you. Scarlet cried for a long time that day, not from sadness, but from knowing finally that her story wasn't just hers anymore. The first time she invited him to her family's home, he brought pie from a local bakery and accidentally spilled coffee on his shirt before the door even opened. Her mother liked him immediately. Her sister gave him a nickname he pretended to hate. Scarlet watched him laugh in her living room, surrounded by noise, mismatched furniture, the smell of laundry and home-cooked food, and knew he was real here, not because he belonged, but because he chose to. One night in late August, they sat on the rooftop of the old design building. The same place she once left a note asking herself whether she'd ever be seen for more than her circumstance. She wore a hoodie. He wore a scarf he swore he didn't knit himself. They said nothing for nearly half an hour. Then he leaned closer, brushed her knuckles lightly, and asked, "Do you ever miss the ballroom?" She looked up at him, quiet, amused. "No," she said. "I brought the best part of it with me." And he smiled, a real one, not the polished grin of a man who owned buildings, but the honest curve of someone who finally felt like he'd come home. They didn't kiss right then. They didn't need to, because when he pulled a folded note from his pocket and handed it to her, she already knew what it would say. "I was watching you that night, but now I'm walking beside you, if you're still willing." Scarlet looked up at him, eyes soft, voice steady. "I've never stopped." That night, in a quiet room filled with fabric scraps, half-drawn ideas, and warm light, she whispered what she'd once only dared to write. "I don't need to be saved, just seen, and stayed with." He nodded, took her hand, and stayed, because love doesn't always arrive in a perfect dress. Sometimes it walks in wearing a trash bag and never leaves your side again.